Okay, I'm going to try and introduce a concept here that I'm very fond of, and that concept is what I call a candidate principle. Now, this is a concept I came up with for my logic classes to sort of explain something about the nature of argument. Oh, hang on, I'll go get the pens out. Run out of pens. So what a candidate principle is, a, oh, that's not working, a rule that may or may not be an actual logical rule. So that's called a candidate principle. It might be a principle, it's offered as a principle, but it's not necessarily a principle. It's not a principle until we decide it is. And so it's something that's offered as a potential logical rule, and we should consider whether it's really a rule or not. And this is something that happens quite a lot in arguments, is that people give arguments that rely on unstated, usually unstated, logical rules that when you look at them turn out to be dodgy. So that when you look at the rule, you look at the argument, and you figure out what has to be true in terms of logic for this argument to work. I'm going to talk about three potential arguments for incompatibilism, three arguments that I found that say that that determinism rules out free will. These are three arguments that determinism rules out free will. And I'm going to look at the candidate principle of those arguments. Okay. So, actually I'm going to look at four. I'm going to talk about, remember before the break we talked about the could do otherwise thing. And that's sort of an argument for incompatibilism. In order for you to be acting on your own free will, it has to be that you could have done otherwise even though you didn't want to, even though you didn't decide to. But put this in terms of an argument. This really only applies to free actions, actions where someone picks you up and moves you, or where you're forced to do something. I'm not really talking about here. I'm talking about stuff the compatibilists say is free will. So if determinism is true, you will, in free actions, when you're free, And I'm locating this at the level of volition because that's what action is. Action is what follows volition. Right? I make a decision. If it's a real decision, it's followed by a volition, and that volition is followed by action. Volition is the mental part of doing something that you're doing. Right? So, if determinism is true, you will, if you are free, never do anything other than what your volitions determine you will do. Right. And then the conclusion, right, you could do otherwise if you wanted to, but that's not good enough. It has to be, for you to have free will, it has to be true that you could do otherwise, even though you did not want or decide to do otherwise. So if determinism is true, your free actions will always be the things that your volitions determined that you would do. Therefore, determinism rules out free will. Now, what is the candidate principle here? What is assumed in this argument to make this, which is true, I will never do anything other than what my volitions make me do. If I have the volition to wave my hand in the air, right, I'll do it. My volition determines what I do, unless I've got Bell's palsy. So I guess when my body starts breaking down and I can no longer act on my volitions, when I'm a real old man and I'm trying to move my hand and I can't. But until then, while I have my powers, while I act freely and on my own choices, if determinism is true, what I desire, my desires will determine my decisions, which will determine my volitions, which will determine my actions. And I won't ever, it won't ever be the case that I could do something that I didn't decide to do of my own will, if that makes sense. So this is true. How does that rule out free will? The only thing that can connect that is that is taking out the determinism, because this is what this is saying. Determinism is true. What you do is determined by what you think. What you do, what you think is determined by who you are and what's happening to you. So it's the determinism here that's the problem. So determinism rules out free will. And here's the candidate principle. Actions are only free if they are random, if they are undetermined. Remember, there's only two choices, determinism or not determinism. Right? There's no third leg to this. There's no situation of being not determined and not determined. You can have determinism or you can have not determinism. This rejects determinism, and it says actions are only free if they're random. Is it true that actions are only free if they're random? I did this, but I did not cause myself to do it. Think about that as a defense in a court of law. Your Honor, the defendant is not guilty because although he robbed the bank, he didn't make himself rob the bank. It was coincidence. Right? But he wanted to rob the bank. We know he planned to rob the bank. Yes, but when he got into the bank, intending to rob the bank, him intending to rob the bank didn't make him rob the bank. A random thing happened, and by coincidence, out of nowhere, he robbed the bank. Does that make any sense? Is that our definition of free will? No, it's not. And that's why the could do otherwise argument against free will just fails. It's rubbish. So now I'm going to talk about Honderic's argument against compatibilism. Why Honderic thinks the compatibilists are wrong. And Honderic has a definition of free will. Action is only an agent's free action if it is an uncaused action originated by the agent. Okay, now, Palmer in our text makes a big deal about origination. In the text he says, libertarians are attracted to the idea of origination, of uncaused actions originated by the agent, right? Undetermined actions that come from the agent. Now, you know what the word origination means in real life, because it's an older word than this debate. Right? You know the word origin, the origin of something, like the origin of a story, the origin of an urban legend, the origin of a mysterious gem that lights the lives of everyone that touches it. Well, you know, there are words we use every day, like blog. What's the origin of the word blog? Do anyone know how we got the word blog? It's just sort of a shortening of the word weblog. Weblog, and they shortened it at the front instead of the back. So it's a blog, it's a weblog. Nowadays we talk about, I'm going to go to the internet and look this thing up in a search engine. What do we say? I'm going to Google it. Right? Now Google is a verb. It used to be a noun. It used to be the name of a number. It still is. Right? So these things have their origins. Right? And when you say, what's the origin of this? And you find out the particular situation. Well, let me put it this way. When I said the origin of the word blog is a weblog, did you say to yourself, oh no, he has to go back to the beginning of time and ultimate causes. Or he has to show something where it's not caused at all. Right? It has to be not caused at all to be originated. That doesn't make sense, does it? Right? We don't think of things as uncaused. I've got another one. You ever heard the phrase, the whole shebang?
Yeah.
Do you know what that comes from?
No.
A shebang is an Irish, is a little shanty pub. It's an Irish illegal drinking establishment in Ireland, where you drink poitín, which is a potato spirit that, well, it's like being hit in the back of the throat with a ball-peen hammer, but it's good. It's really good. If you get good Irish-made poitín, it's really good. It's a lot better than White Lightning or any of that stuff. It's good stuff. Yeah, my friend Seamus. I know these guys, Seamus and Tristan. They reenact the IRA of 1919 to 1921. So it's pretty good. And they sing. So, so we have the origin of something, or what's the origin of the computer, as a matter of fact. Because computers, nobody said, oh look, we'll make a computer. Computers were actually developed in the United Kingdom, a place called Bletchley Park, during World War II. The first computer was called Colossus, and it was used as a code-breaking machine. And the origin of computer theory, the computer science. The first computer scientist was a fellow called Alan Turing, who sat down to study the formal properties of computing devices. So we have this origin, right? Things have origins, but they're not uncaused. Because we look at why they made Colossus was because the Germans had a code machine and we were at war with the Germans. We wanted to break their codes. So if you look at something, why do we have the word blog? Well, because people like writing things and sharing them, and computers came along and they came up with this thing called the World Wide Web, and people started writing these web logs, these online diaries, and they came up with a name for it. So it goes back, and if you want, probably someone would have invented computers, but the way computers were invented historically is Bletchley Park, and then IBM, UNIVAC, research universities in America. So there's all this history behind Googling and blogs and a bunch of other tweets. So when we think about how something originates, I'm trying to think of something physical, something like it's really cool. Velcro. There was a Swiss guy invented Velcro in Switzerland, so it originated in the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines originated in Scotland and then spread across Europe and then the world. So we ask how something originated. We find the story of how it came to be, and we stop. That's it originating. That's what originating means. What does originating mean in this concept? Why is he using the word originating here? Right? What does it mean? Well, if I walk up to you and slap you up the side of the head, I would have originated pain in you. What's another word for origination? Well, I would have caused pain. Is there any difference between originating something and causing it? No, there isn't. They bring in a new word, and this is the same thing with necessity, randomness, freedom. Right? So, an action is only the agent's free action if it is an uncaused action caused by the agent. No wonder they needed a different word. This makes no sense. An action is only free if it's an uncaused action caused by the agent. What's the candidate principle here? What's the definition of free? An action is only free, is the same as before. Free equals uncaused or undetermined. Another word for this is truly random. Right? Free equals randomness. Freedom equals randomness. And the answer that I have to that is no, it doesn't. Freedom does not equal randomness. A free action is not a random action. A random action is a random action. An uncaused action is a random action. An undetermined action is a random action. And that's the problem with this idea of origination, is it's logically incoherent. Now we could have originated in, we could imagine that there's some random thing going on in me that makes my actions. But that is not a pleasant prospect to contemplate. Because if there's a random thing in me making my actions, it's not me. If my actions came at random, that would be madness, chaos. I'd be throwing things around, kicking people, dancing, doing things that make no sense to me. So, so. Right. So that's Honderich, and that's why I think Honderich doesn't make sense. Then we have Van Inwagen. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Van Inwagen. Van Inwagen, it's called the consequence argument because it talks about stuff being consequences of other stuff. I'll try and do it as an argument. Oops. His first premise, everything that happens now is a consequence of the laws of nature and events in the distant past. Everything is a consequence of the laws of nature and events in the distant past. And we discussed this when we talked about determinism in general. So the state of the universe way, way back, plus the laws of nature, determined its status now, because nothing came through any magic door and disturbed the system. All right. The laws of nature are not up to us. I think that's pretty clear, pretty clearly true. The state of the distant past, or events in the distant past, were not up to us. The distant past is not under our control, because we weren't there. That seems pretty obvious. Our actions, being present events, right, being part of this everything, are ultimately consequences of things that were not up to us. Our actions, being present events, are ultimately consequences of things that were not up to us. And then he draws a conclusion. Our actions are not up to us. Free will doesn't exist. So I guess I should say that if determinism is true, everything that happens now is a consequence of the laws of nature and events in the past. So this premise assumes determinism is true, which is a good assumption based on science. The laws of nature are not up to us. This is true. The laws of nature are not up to us. I cannot affect the laws of nature, neither can you. The state of the distant past was not up to us. Events of the distant past were not up to us. I wasn't in the distant past. Right? I mean, I'm pretty old, but I'm not that old. There was like lots of history before I was born. In fact, tens of thousands of years of history. Our actions, being present events of things that happen in the present, are ultimately consequences of things that were not up to us. So what I'm doing now is a consequence of events that happened billions of years ago, we could say, or at least millions of years ago. Well, actually, billions of years ago. Right. So ultimately, my actions are not consequences of things that were not up to me. So our actions, Van Inwagen says, are not up to us. Now, I've left a gap here because when I read this, the argument in the text that's given in the text, and I also looked him up on Wikipedia, right? It goes from this to this, but I don't see any connection there. How is this supposed to come out of this? So that's why I want to look for a candidate principle. So, you guys know the meaning of the word proximate? You ever heard that phrase in a legal drama, the proximate cause of something? It means the thing that was actually the cause of death, or cause of something kind of. Like if someone falls off the side of the Empire State Building or the New World Trade Building in New York, right? And they fall for quite a while. I don't know, a minute or so, and then they hit the ground, right? And the proximate cause of and however they hit, the medical examiner looks and says, say they got a broken neck. So the proximate cause was the broken neck. The thing that caused the broken neck was the impact of the pavement. The thing that caused the impact was the fall. Right? The thing that caused the fall was him going away from the side of the building in a gravity field that was pulling him towards the earth, right? Without a parachute, and he's not Superman. Okay? So, right, the proximate cause is the most immediate thing. And that means that we are the proximate causes of our own actions. Right? Something when we act in what was called free will, right? When I threw that pen there, I was the proximate cause of that pen flying. Now, the ultimate cause, you have to look at the whole state of the universe a billion years ago. Right? Ultimate cause, or whatever started the universe, you look at that, and that's the ultimate cause of that pen being thrown over there. Proximate cause was me. Now, I would say I did it freely. Nobody made me do it. Did you see a ninja holding swords or a guy with a gun to my head saying, throw that pen? No, I just got sort of annoyed and threw it. And I said, that's not going to work, and threw the pen. Right? So I would say that was a free action. Van Inwagen says, no, it's not a free action because it's a consequence of something that's not up to you. Well, how do we relate those ultimate consequences with proximate consequences? And there has to be a premise in here. There has to be a logical principle, all right? Something that might or may not be a logical principle, what I call a candidate principle. We can only be the proximate cause of our own actions if we are also the ultimate cause of those actions. That is, our actions can only be consequences of us if those actions are also are ultimately consequences of stuff that was up to us. I'll put it in a, see if I can get that, say that coherently. Our actions are only up to us if they are ultimately consequences of things that were up to us. Right. And I think that this is completely wrong. I think that this misconstrues the idea of up to us. And I'm going to try and illustrate this with in a diagram. Now, looking at sort of the simple picture first, we have, past, that's good, man, coming down to the present. And you remember the domino chains for standing in for causality, line of dominoes, and you tick one over. You ever seen those videos of like 1 million dominoes in the floor of an aircraft carrier, an aircraft hangar or something like that? Huge flat space, and someone took a year, or teams of people took months to set out hundreds of thousands of dominoes, and then it's all set up, and they set up cameras and recording devices, and then one guy goes and just touches one domino, and hits the next one, and that one hits the next one, and it builds speed, and then it hits two, and it splits off, and it curls in and out of itself, and then comes back and knocks down these ones, and this wave is knocked down here, and then its wave goes back there, just around and up and down, and I don't know what else. Right? So you have this sort of idea of a complicated chain of causality, like dominoes plowing through time from the past to the present. And you can just sort of see them as like, these are sort of the causal arrows coming from the past to the future. And there's certainly nothing over here is up to us, because we don't exist over here. We're not here. Right? All these convoluted tangles of causality lead to all kinds of stuff that doesn't affect us, and it's clearly not up to us. The stuff that's happening, I don't know, in Bakersfield right now is not up to me. I have no causal effect on what's going on in Bakersfield right now. Places I've never visited, I don't affect causally. Right? It's not up. And stuff that happened before I was born, I don't affect. But there's something else that goes on too. Something else that goes on. We can also recognize that certain threads of causality, such as, your parents, the families of your parents going from different countries to end up all together in the same country where your parents met, right? Think of all the peregrinations of your ancestors that ended up with your parents meeting and falling in love and getting married and having you, right? So there's all this causality maybe from all over the world that results, it all comes together and produces you. Here you are, you're a baby. You're a happy baby. And at this point in time, birth or conception or whatever, you start to exist. You are now a thing in the world. The world has something in it that it did not have before. That thing is you. And fairly quickly, within a few months of coming into existence as a zygote, you start to have an effect. Right. Your mother might have a memory of the first time you kicked. Right. And those of you who've known pregnant people, ooh, the baby's kicking. Ow, a little sod. I hate him. They never tell you that when you grow up. So the baby kicked. Well, I get a very big feet or backwards facing knees. I'm not sure why. There we go. Little tiny baby feet. That's more like. Okay. Maybe we should give them claws. And fangs. No, just a happy little baby. And you kick and you do stuff. And so you exist, right? You extend through time to here you are now. Bigger, still happy. Maybe not quite so happy. Right? So you exist in time, and as you go through time, stuff happens to you. I'll do that in a different color. Right? There's inputs. Right? Things happen to you. Your parents do things. Your siblings do things. Other people do things. You see birds and trees and houses and monkeys and or whatever you see or hear or feel. There's all these inputs into you. And some of them are recorded as memory traces in this very, very, very complicated thing inside your skull called a brain. The most complicated single object in the universe that we know about. Fantastically complicated, more complicated than a galaxy. All this complexity, and you do stuff. You say stuff and you do stuff. You throw things. You have inputs. You initiate. You originate things. Basically, in the normal, everyday usage of the word originate, you have effects on the world. You do stuff. You make stuff. Your parents' refrigerator might have a picture you drew, right, that originated from you. You may have invented an imaginary friend or a new kind of monster or something, or a new word or something that just only existed because of you. Or you have, instances of things that you've made. Right. And you've had an effect on the world. And you started all these causal chains going away from you. Now, it's pretty clear that causal chains that do not intersect us, right, are not up to us. Right? There's a lot of stuff happening in the world that has nothing whatsoever to do with you, that you've had no effect on whatsoever. That you couldn't, if you don't even know about, you can't affect. The stuff you've done, there's the effects you've had that you don't know about, but I'm not talking about those. Right? So this stuff is not up to us. The stuff that happened before you're born is not up to you. The laws of nature are not up to you. But why is this stuff that happened before you and this stuff that happened before you not up to you? What is the reason for that? Why would we say that? Think about this. Why did Van Inwagen not start with the baby you? When you're born, what you do is not up to you. The effects you have are not up to you. Would his argument have been at all persuasive if we'd started here, with you being born, with people being born? Once people are born, their actions are not up to them. It would make no sense to anyone. Right? He has to go away from us. Has to move to the laws of nature, which are never up to us, and to events in the distant past which are not up to us. But the reason those events are not up to us is because we weren't there. Right? That's why it's not up to us. Once we exist, in the normal way of talking about up to us, the normal way of talking about action, it is up to us. What we do is up to us. That's how we talk about it all the time. So Van Inwagen has to prove that we're wrong about this. And just saying, oh, it's the consequences of ancient actions, ancient events, doesn't seem to cut it for me. Doesn't seem to make that. Think about this, right? Go into a court of law and you have someone on trial for murder. And you say, did he kill the woman? Did he kill the victim? And they say, yes. Did anyone force him to do it? And they say, no, nobody held a gun to his head or blackmailed him or anything. He killed the victim because the victim had money and he wanted the money. And then the defense lawyer says, but it wasn't up to him. Why not? Well, because if you look at his childhood, you see that his character was formed by his parents and his peers and his genes, and those are things that were not up to him. He couldn't choose his parents, he didn't choose where he was born, where he grew up, he couldn't choose the people he interacted with, he could avoid some of them, but lots of stuff happened to him that he absolutely had no control over. And all of the stuff that happened to him that he did have control over, that was all consequences of events in the distant past. So therefore, he's not responsible for what he does in the present. Would anyone buy this for a second? What kind of argument could be made? So I'm asking, what's the candidate principle here? What is in Wagen's candidate principle is a free-willed act is a consequence of your decision, right? If I do something, it's a result of my decisions. So if they're consequences of decisions that are themselves ultimately consequences are things that were up to us. Right? Remember that, what I filled in that premise? This is the same idea. You know, events that are only consequences of our decisions. Oh, it's not grammatical. If they are themselves ultimately consequences of things that were up to us. When I say ultimate consequences, you've got to push the causality as far back in time as you can. You've got to go back forever to the very beginning and look at that and say, okay, that was the ultimate cause of everything. Everything is ultimately consequences of that. Was that ultimate thing up to us? No, it wasn't. So the stuff we did today was not up to us. I don't see why stuff has to be ultimately consequences of things that are up to us in order to be up to us. Because if something is a consequence of my decision, it's a consequence of me. I exist for certain reasons. I was caused. And the configuration of the past and the laws of nature caused me to have the character that I do. And that character then made the decisions. And that's what makes them up to me. We don't have a Van Inwagen defense in our court of law. we have coercion, removing free will. We have mental disease or defect, removing the capacity to choose. But when someone has the capacity to choose, that means they have the capacity to choose. So we think that those actions are up to us. Does that make sense? I mean, you don't have to agree with me. You just have to understand the argument. So, I just erased that. I meant to keep that. Well, all right. I can do it again. So now we get to Strawson, right? Now I've said, right, stuff is up to me if it's a result of my character. Right. So Strawson has this argument. And I guess his argument is basically his candidate principle. I gotta phrase this very carefully. Actions that are the results of our characters are only truly our actions if we ultimately created our own characters. Okay. Character is, broadly speaking, another word for personality. It kind of refers to the kind of person you are. We use the term moral character, meaning someone's predilection to do or not do immoral things. Someone of good moral character won't lie, they won't steal, they won't cheat. Generally, they'll be kind to people. Someone of bad character will lie when it suits him, cheat when it suits him, steal when it suits him, and so on. So the character is your collection of dispositions to do things or refrain from doing things. What you do and what you don't do defines your character. Now, most of us have done some work on ourselves. Have you ever had a bad habit or a personality trait that you didn't like and you worked hard to eradicate it? I used to get irrationally angry with my daughter, and I worked very hard to not do that anymore, and I don't. I'm actually pretty pleased about that. I have other bad habits that I work on. Some I've got a handle on, others, some things about myself I'm still trying to change, but other things I did change. So we do that, right? And we can imagine, and we've heard of and seen in literature, people who at one point in their lives are bad people, and then they realize they're bad people and try to change, right? That are the people that can be really nasty. Oh, the hymn, Amazing Grace, that was written by a former slave ship captain, one of the most horrible kinds of people in the world, and he did these horrible things, carried slaves across the Middle Passage, and many of whom died on the way in horrible conditions, and then sold them into bondage in horrible conditions in the American South and the Caribbean. So he changed, and he became a Christian and worked very hard to redeem himself. When he felt he had been redeemed, he wrote the hymn "Amazing Grace," which is one of the most powerful statements, I think, of Christian thought I know of. So people, we can change ourselves. But the trouble is, we're not ultimately in charge of our characters. Because when we're born, we have a character. And when we grow up and we get into bad company and do bad things, there's a difference between the people who repent and change and the people who don't. And that difference is in their characters. Because the person who's going to change recognizes that he's going wrong. And the ones who don't change either don't recognize it or don't care. So, have you ever known someone who's an ass? Someone who's unpleasant and mean or stupid, and you know they can change, you know they can do better, but they don't. And so every time you meet them, you know, I've known people that I know that if I talk to them, within 5 minutes they'll say something nasty, some rant, some out of nowhere insult, or that they'll be looking for some way to put me down. Or there's the idea of the old racist uncle that you, I used to know this fellow called Wade, and I knew that within 5 minutes of starting to talk to him, he would say something nasty about President Obama. Not factually based, it's just, you know, he's the real pirates in the White House. Just this kind of stuff. And there's all kinds of prejudiced people of all kinds of prejudices that don't change. Why don't they change? Well, according to determinism, there's something about their characters that they don't recognize that they should change. They don't recognize that they're prejudiced. They don't recognize this. And so the ones that do change, the ones that there's a fellow called Ingo Hasselbach. I've got his book, but I haven't read it because I'm afraid to. He was a neo-Nazi in Germany in the 1980s, I think, and he was a leader in the neo-Nazi movement. And then one day he looks around and says, you know what, we're assholes. This is wrong. And he left the movement, and he had to go into hiding because his former comrades wanted to kill him and stuff like that. Well, you know, I look at this guy and I say, this is an amazing thing. This is someone who's gotten into a very horrible place morally. He's a very an evil person. And then he turns out and he says he decides not to be evil. But, as Strawson would point out, there's something in him that made him capable of recognizing this, that was caused. And it was something that he had in him from his history, from his birth. And it's not something he's ultimately responsible for, because at a certain point you go back and you find this existed without him ever choosing it. Right? Like, I don't choose my height, I don't choose my hair color, I don't get to choose the shape of my face. Absent plastic surgery, I don't really get to choose my character. There's something, the seeds of what I am now existed in me when I was born. And there's a lot of inputs from outside, but it's all a deterministic process. There's never a point where I get to have no character and choose what character I'm going to have. It's always a subjective thing. So there's always a character choosing. And that's what Strawson is saying, right? We don't ultimately create our own characters. But my answer to that is, so what? I am a character. When I look out at people and I judge people, there's some people I judge as good, and some I judge as bad, and some people I judge as very good, and amazing people, and some people are amazingly bad people or amazingly stupid people. And okay, I know that ultimately this person was made by the laws of nature and the facts of history by DNA and upbringing and life experiences and so on. 1,000 factors went to it. And if you wound the situation back, you know, to his birth, and you made everything exactly the same, right down to all the shifting gravity fields of the solar system and the last vibration, the last quark and the last proton in his body, it'd turn out exactly the same. Right? He was a son of a bitch this time, he'd be a son of a bitch the next time. Right? But that doesn't stop me being able to judge that he's a son of a bitch. Right, okay, I know ultimately there's a lot of stuff that you couldn't help being, and really fundamentally, ultimately, that was responsible for you being a son of a bitch, and that's ultimately not in your control. But the guy who turns out marvelous, I judge him marvelous. And once you're created, you exist in the world. If you remember the thing for Van Inwagen, right? You're a baby, you exist as a thing, again with the huge feet, claw-like hands, and scary eyes now. Okay, I'm not happy with this baby. But you exist, you're the robot baby or whatever, and then you're big and you do stuff. Yeah, you turned out all right. Oh, your eyes are too close together. So, you do something, you're a thing, and that thing can be judged, and that thing is an object existing in the world that has actions. And the words free will and action and stuff all apply to this, even though we're not ultimately responsible for our characters. Okay, any questions? Is this all making sense? There's a study guide up. I think it's called finalstudy.htm. I think I sent a link out, but I don't remember. All right, I'm not sure. All right. See you all here on the day of the final, which I think is like next week this time. All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you for your attention.